Hello students, welcome. Today we will discuss regarding departmental accounts, which is a part of your BCom syllabus. Now before understanding departmental accounts, we'll have to understand that what is a department. Now say for example a business house, it has grown its business operations and it has various kinds of departments under one single roof. For example, this is a case, this is a business house, where under the business one single roof there are various departments. Say for example, grocery department is there, medicine department is there, cosmetics department is there. Now each of these departments has their respective expenses and has their respective incomes. Now these expenses and revenues has to be divided between these various departments under certain proportion. Now what is the proportion we need to follow, we'll discuss later. So as we have understood that there are various expenditures and various revenues of the respective departments which has to be allocated or which has to be apportioned between the respective departments under a certain ratio and certain proportion. So for this we are required to prepare departmental trading and profit and loss account. We are required to prepare departmental trading and profit and loss account. Now these departmental trading and profit and loss account, how this account is to be prepared, we will discuss. And remember one thing, here we do not prepare any balance sheet for any individual departments, whereas the balance sheet is to be prepared on an overall basis. Clear? Only one balance sheet is prepared on an overall basis. Now how the departmental accounts are being prepared? There are two methods, you can say there are two methods of departmental accounts, departmental accounting. What are the two methods? The first method is they can keep their accounts separately as department wise. This is the very first method. The first method I will write as keeping accounts of each department separately. This is the first way of keeping the accounts of each department separately. Now the second way is keeping accounts of each department in columnar system. Keeping accounts of each department in columnar system. Now basically in your examinations this particular method has been followed. Basically questions from this method is been asked, and we will also discuss regarding this particular part, that how departmental trading and profit and loss account is kept in columnar system. Clear? Now we will have to understand that there are certain expenses which are called as common expenses. Now what is the meaning of common expenses? Now there are certain expenses which has been incurred by the business, but these expenses or these benefits has been derived by all the departments. Is it clear? So this is called as common expenses. The expenses has been paid by the business on behalf of all the departments. So this is an example of common expenses. Now this common expenses has to be allocated amongst various departments, as I said earlier, has to be allocated amongst various departments on certain ratios and certain proportions. So we will discuss that. And one more thing is there are certain expenses which is in respect to the particular department. So for that, no issue, we will have to allocate that expenses to that respective department. Say for example, rupees 7,000 has been paid for a certain expenses which is only benefited for this grocery department. So this will be allocated only to grocery department. Or purchase has been made by the medicines, so this will only be allocated to this particular medicine department. So for those expenses we do not have to worry, but those expenses which are common in nature has to be allocated amongst the various departments on a certain ratio. So what are the proportion, or what are the ratios on which the expenses has to be allocated, we'll discuss. Now let us take the example of the various expenses which are common for all the departments and which has to be apportioned. Now on what basis these are to be apportioned? Say for example, I am writing it as an expenses on one side and basis of apportionment. Basis of apportionment. Now how these expenses are to be allotted? For example, there are certain expenses on purchases. There are certain expenses on purchases. Now what might be the expenses on purchases? Say for example, carriage inward, comma, you can say as freight or octroi duty, or any other expenses which is related to purchases. Okay. Now these particular expenses is to be apportioned on the various departments on what ratio? On the basis of departmental purchases. On the basis of departmental purchases. Say for example, the purchases of grocery department is 10,000, medicine is 20,000, and cosmetics is 30,000. So what will be the ratio? 1:2:3. So on this particular ratio, the expenses on purchases will have to be allocated. Now coming to other expenses, say for example, expenses on sale. Expenses on sales, what are the example? Carriage outward, or you can say bad debts, or you can say discount allowed, etc. Now likewise this expenses which is related to sale, this will have to be allocated on what? On the basis of departmental sales. Now there are certain other expenses. Say for example, expenses on building. Now what might be the expenses? Say for example, rent, rates, taxes, repairs. Now these are to be allocated on what basis? On the basis of space occupied. Now what is space occupied? That how much area they are occupying. Coming to the fourth point, power, lighting, heating, or electricity. Now on what basis these expenses are to be allocated? On the basis of number of points or space occupied. Number of points of what? Number of points means the electrical points, you can say, or if there is a separate submeter, you can say, because these are relating to electricity. So if there is a separate submeter, so based on the submeter reading also the expenses might be allocated. Now expenses on machinery. expenses on machinery. What might be the expenses on machinery? For example, depreciation, repairs. Now these expenses are to be allocated on the various ratios, various departments. On which ratio? On the basis of space occupied by machines in each department. You can say space occupied by machines in each department. Okay, or on the basis of the value of the machinery, on the basis of value of machine used, on the basis of value of machine used. Also on this basis this can be allocated. Now there might be certain other expenses, say for example staff welfare expense. Staff welfare expenses means those expenses which are spent for the benefit of the staff. It might be recreation, or it might be canteen expense, etc. So these expenses will be allocated based on what? On the basis of number of workers, on the basis of how many workers each department is having, or employees each department is having. Based on that, the expenses of staff welfare expense, recreation expense, or canteen expense has to be allocated. Now there are certain other expenses also, say for example premium or insurance. Premium means insurance premium, or you can say insurance on what? Insurance on stock. Premium on insurance of stock. So this can be allocated on the basis of average stock of each departments. So I hope regarding how the expenses are to be allocated is clear. Now one more thing, if the allocation of the respective expenses is unable to be traced, or is unable to be done, say for example there is a particular expense you are unable to make the ratio or make the allocation. So on what basis you can allocate? You can allocate on the basis of respective sales. Remember this point, you must remember. If the basis of allocation is not given, or the expenses can be allocated on the basis of sales. So for today my session is this much. So I will continue the next part in my next class. Thank you.